If you ever loved me, just die. My wife was furious when I came home, after declaring me dead, taking the insurance money, and running away with her lover. Now she begs me to die again for the kids. 5 years have passed since my life changed forever. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I was never the same after what I went through. I still remember every detail, and sometimes I'm surprised I endured so much. Today I want to tell what happened because sometimes people don't believe these things can happen until it happens to them. It all started with a move. I was transferred for work to a position in the interior of the country. I asked for it myself. I don't know if it has happened to you, but the city ends up suffocating you. The traffic, the noise, the same rhythm every day, it reaches a point where you need a break. When the opportunity arose to move to the province, I saw it as a way to keep working, but with a different atmosphere, almost like a sabbatical. I accepted without thinking too much. My wife, Talia, was not happy at all. For her, the capital was everything. She was born there. Her whole life revolved around her family, her friends, the shops, the routine she knew. I was the one who brought home the income, and she had been a housewife for years. I understood it was hard for her, but the decision was made. We left with our 2 young children, the older one 5 years old and the younger one 3. I don't have them in my life anymore, but at that moment they were everything that gave me strength. The funny thing was that the kids adapted better than their mother. Soon they had friends in the neighborhood, knew the parks, and even enjoyed the calm of the place. But with Talia, the distance began to grow slowly. At first I thought it was typical nostalgia, missing her family, the city, the shops. I tried to be patient, but with each passing week I noticed she was more distant, more withdrawn. I suggested we talk, go out together, but she always found an excuse. And even though we were still living under the same roof, I felt there was an invisible wall between us. Then something happened that finished destroying everything. One afternoon I received an anonymous message. The number was not saved and there was no introduction. It was direct, without explanation, just dry phrases that left me cold. The first one said, "Stop playing blind. Your wife has a lover." Minutes later another one arrived. "She loves him, not you." And finally, the hardest blow. "The children you are raising are not yours, they are his." I remember the exact feeling. My heart sank to the floor, my hands were sweating. I read and reread those messages as if they had been written with fire. There was no name, no proof, but those words stuck in my head. I waited for her to get out of the shower and confronted her. I showed her the message on the screen. The expression I saw on her face told me everything, even if just for a second. Surprise, fear, as if a mask had fallen off. She quickly composed herself and told me she couldn't believe I would swallow anonymous gossip, that it was ridiculous to think she was cheating on me, that surely someone wanted to hurt us. Her voice sounded convincing, but that first gesture was not erased from my mind. I responded as coldly as I could, that there was no point in arguing, that everything would be cleared up with a paternity test. I told her it was useless to lie to me because the results would speak for themselves. I asked her directly, "Were you unfaithful to me? Are those children mine or not?" She lowered her head, took a deep breath, and said with a firm voice, "They are your children. I have never been unfaithful to you." Her words didn't convince me. I felt she was hiding something, but I wanted to give her one last chance. We decided to travel over the weekend to the nearest city where they could do the DNA test. They attended to us quickly and explained that the results would be ready in 4 days, that they could mail them to me. She didn't open her mouth the entire trip. The children played in the square while we barely exchanged glances. Something was broken, even if it was trying to hold itself together. That week was the longest of my life. Every day, I woke up hoping it was all a lie, that the results would give me peace, and that I could hug my children without that shadow behind me. On the 5th day, the mail arrived. I opened it with trembling hands. I will never forget what I felt. Neither of the 2 children was mine. Not one. I stared at the paper, the numbers, the raw words. I didn't understand how I could have lived so many years believing in a lie. I felt scammed, humiliated, used. The worst part was thinking about all the sleepless nights, every effort, every future plan. It had all been based on a betrayal. I put the paper away, took a deep breath, and looked for Talia. I didn't want to shout. I didn't want to give the children that spectacle. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Did you do it? You cheated on me." She broke down in tears. There was nothing left to hide. She covered her face, apologized, begged me not to leave her. I couldn't even listen to her. I told her I wanted her out of the house, that we would start the divorce. She pleaded for me to give her a couple of days, to let her say goodbye to the children. She told me she couldn't handle them alone, that she had no job, that she couldn't carry that life. I had already made my decision. I replied that those children were not mine, that I would legally contest paternity, that what she did with them would be her responsibility. I allowed her to stay for 2 more nights, but I ordered her to sleep on the sofa. I didn't want to see her sharing the bed with me again. Those were 2 tense days of silence, tears, of glances that said more than words. I don't know if you have ever felt that mix of rage and emptiness. I wanted to believe I was doing the right thing, but at the same time I felt a lot of confusing emotions. I couldn't erase from my head the idea that everything I had lived with my supposed children had been a farce. It hurt to look at them and know that the blood running in them was not mine. I felt that every time they called me dad, it was a knife in my chest. That was the first stage of the hell I had to live through. I thought the worst was over, that the hardest truth was already on the table, that what followed would be a painful but clear process. Divorce, contesting paternity, starting over. I felt sorry for those children. They had been part of my life, but the betrayal I felt prevented me from feeling anything but mocked when I saw them. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time to think about what was coming, because on the same day that Talia was supposed to leave the house, something happened at my job that would change my life forever. It was a fire so big and so fast that you could actually say it was an explosion. That's how they described it later in the reports, a leak combined with sparks and flammable material. The truth is that in seconds, everything was smoke, fire, and screams. That day I arrived early. I had spent the night awake thinking about the separation, the papers, how to face my new life without the kids. I was tired, my head was elsewhere. When I heard the first alarm, I didn't think it was serious. In small plants, alarms sometimes go off for anything, a valve, a poorly calibrated sensor. But within a minute, the smell of smoke was already in the air. I looked towards the workshop door and saw a black column rising like a fist. Someone shouted fire, and everything became chaotic. I remember scattered scenes. A colleague trying to close a valve, another who tripped and fell, and the flames advanced on him before anyone could help him. I remember my hands trembling, the heat, the alarm sirens mixed with the screams. At some point I tried to run towards the exit, but the smoke was so thick I could barely see. I had the sensation that the air was burning me from the inside. People were pushing. Some were covering their mouths with handkerchiefs. Everything happened so fast that even today I wonder how I got out of there. I have no exact memory of my escape. I know I managed to reach an area where there was less smoke. I know I collapsed at some point. After that, nothing. Fragments, voices, sirens, then darkness. They told me the firefighters pulled me out, that they put me in an ambulance along with other injured people. I don't remember anything. My mind erased it. And maybe that was for the best, because those who were conscious say it was hell. The town where it all happened was small. It didn't have a large hospital or an emergency network prepared for such a tragedy. There were more injured than they could handle. That's why we were sent to different centers according to our severity. Separation of evacuees by priority, critical to one side, minor to another, others who could not be saved. They took me to Hospital A. Other colleagues were taken to Hospital B, and some directly to the morgue, all in the midst of chaos. That's where the confusion began. As they explained to me later, there were problems with the tags, with the files, with the belongings. An unidentified body was marked with my name because it was wearing a jacket identical to mine, with the company logo. My wallet and my cell phone had been left in my locker, so there was no way to identify me upon arriving unconscious. I was admitted as a John Doe, a patient without a name. Meanwhile, they called my wife to identify a charred body. They showed her a man of similar height and build. She said it was me. She signed the papers. I was declared dead. I learned all this much later. At that moment, I was in an induced coma, intubated, with third-degree burns on my face, neck, both arms and legs. I was all bandaged up. Even my own hands didn't look like mine. The doctors kept me in an induced coma to stabilize me because my lungs were also damaged from smoke inhalation. Weeks passed. Meanwhile, my dear wife Talia, and I say that with sarcasm, claimed the life insurance. She did it quickly, with all the papers they gave her. I'm sure she wanted to get rid of me as soon as possible. Maybe for her it was an opportunity to close the chapter, keep the money, and continue her life with the man she really loved. That's what I think every time I remember that part. As for the fire, I understand it was arson. The person responsible was never found. Because of them, several colleagues died and others of us were disfigured. You can't imagine the pain I felt when I woke up. I still have scenes of the moment in my head. Seeing a worker I knew burn and not being able to do anything. Being in shock and not realizing the extent of my injuries. Sometimes I wake up at night with the smell of smoke in my nose, even though I know it's impossible. I woke up several weeks later in a hospital I didn't know, with my face covered and an unbearable pain in my throat. I had tubes everywhere. I couldn't speak. At first I thought I had dreamed everything. Then I looked around and saw there was no one familiar, no colleagues, no doctor who called me by my name, no one from my family. The first face I saw was that of an unknown woman. She was a woman of about 40, tired, with swollen eyes. She looked at me with tenderness, like someone looking at a loved one. I didn't understand anything. Later they told me that this woman was the wife of a worker who had also been in the fire. Her husband had died, but in the chaos they confused her and told her that I was him. That's how unrecognizable I was. She took care of me during the weeks I was unconscious. She brought me clothes, talked to me, held my hand. She thought I was her husband, and I, without knowing it, was asleep in the bed where she thought the man she loved lay. When I woke up, my throat was burned and intubated. I could barely move my head. With the little I could articulate, I said my name. She froze. She called the nurses. There were arguments. She didn't understand anything. Neither did I. I felt very sorry for that woman because she had lost her husband, and yet she believed all that time that I was him. She took care of me without knowing she was watching over a stranger. When she could process it, she apologized. I thanked her with gestures. It was strange. She had been the only person in that hospital who treated me like someone loved, even if by mistake. It took days for the doctors and administrative staff to begin to understand the confusion. They realized that there was a death certificate in my name, that my wife had already held the wake, had posted mourning messages on social media, and had collected the insurance. All while I was still alive, breathing with the help of machines. I heard parts of those conversations without being able to speak. The helplessness was enormous. I imagined Talia dressed in black saying she loved me, crying crocodile tears while she took everything. My blood boiled, but I couldn't even lift a hand. The doctors explained that my recovery would be slow, that I would have to learn to speak again, to move normally, that my hands would need grafts and physical therapy. They told me that my legal identity was complicated because officially I was dead. They would need proof to reverse that. Proof that would take weeks. I nodded my head, trying not to fall apart. It was a traumatic process, not only because of the physical pain, but because every day that passed I learned something new. They told me that Talia had not asked questions when identifying the body, that she didn't even ask for a second opinion, that everything was fast, the funeral, the insurance, the move. Everything fit my suspicion that she wanted to close the chapter on me as soon as possible. Waking up like that is hard to explain. It's like coming out of one nightmare to enter another. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, and on top of that, to the world, I was dead. There was no one waiting for me, no one looking out for me other than that woman who had mistaken me for her husband. It was like being a ghost with a body. Everything was a huge void. What they found left them in shock. In their system, there was a death certificate with my name, signed by my wife Talia, records of the wake, and a multi-million-dollar life insurance payment already executed. I was breathing, but on paper, I was a corpse. The prosecutor who came to the hospital brought a file with my black and white photo pasted on top and a red stamp. He showed me the document and asked if I understood what it meant. I nodded. I felt anger, disgust, and a little shame. It was like watching my own funeral on delay. While I was just learning to sit up without getting dizzy, the insurance company had already found out. The company opened an internal investigation and then sent me a formal letter notifying me of their intention to recover the money. In legal terms, it was an improper payment. They had paid for the death of someone who was still alive. With that letter came precautionary measures, a temporary freeze on accounts, a request for seizure of assets, and a civil lawsuit for the return of the sums delivered to my wife. Talia alleged what they usually allege in these cases. I spent it. She said the money was used to pay debts, support the children, move, survive. But the legal response was clear. When there is an improper payment, it must be returned. It doesn't matter if you spend it or not. So the judge ordered seizures and precautionary measures on the accounts in her name, froze funds, and demanded inventories of assets. When Talia found out about all this, she came to see me at the hospital. By then, I was no longer an inpatient. I was living with my parents. Going back to their house and telling them I wasn't dead was harder than I imagined. They had both gone through real grief. My mother had cried in front of a closed casket. My father had organized a funeral, and now there I was, bandaged, my voice broken, saying, I didn't die. They hugged me, and we cried together. They supported me even though I was a different man. At that moment, my self-esteem was on the floor. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my face. I only saw a monster. And still, they told me, we're going to get through this. That was the only thing that kept me going. Talia arrived shortly after. She entered my parents' house as if she still had the right to do so. She sat in front of me and began to speak as if we were business partners, that I should understand that the children were going to have problems, that they already had plans for that money, that I should help her resolve everything. And then, with tears in her eyes, she asked me for something that still echoes in my mind today, for me to die. For me to think of my children. I replied with the driest voice I could muster, that they were not my children, that I had been deceived, that I had no legal or moral obligation to those children. She told me how could I be so cruel, that I had raised them, that they saw me as their father. She insisted, if you ever loved me, die. Make it simple. End it here. You're going to have a hard life too. It's easier if you die now and avoid problems. My parents were listening from the kitchen. Later they told me that just a few weeks after my supposed death, Talia was already living with another guy. I asked her to her face if that man was the children's father. She told me it was possible, but that I should let the past go, that I should close the chapter, that I should please let it go. Her voice was a sweet poison, but it no longer had any effect. I refused. I wasn't interested in the children. I wasn't interested in her drama. I told her I was not going to bear the consequences of her lies, that I would contest paternity, that I would also ask for compensation. I didn't just want her to return the insurance money. I wanted reparations for the damages, having been declared dead, losing my identity, spending months in a coma, being disfigured and jobless. My lawyer prepared the lawsuit. It wasn't a 3-line letter. It was pages and pages with medical reports, certificates, photos, DNA tests, psychological reports. We asked for compensation for moral damages, for damage to identity, for loss of income, the income one lost, for medical expenses, for the impact on my employability. We filed it against Talia and separately against the insurance company as a third party of interest so that the judge could clearly define the repayment. The following years were complicated. I really thought about taking my own life. I would look in the mirror and only see a monster, grafts, scars, different skin. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares of the fire, the smoke, the screams, the colleague who burned alive. And on top of that, every job interview was a reminder of what had happened to me. I would arrive with my resume full of experience and studies. They would smile at me, but as soon as they saw me in person, they would reject me. It was like being a social outcast, someone who makes people uncomfortable, someone nobody wants around. The lawsuits were moving forward. Thanks to the precautionary measures, we managed to prevent all the money from disappearing. With the DNA tests, I contested paternity and was legally freed from the children. The insurance company recovered part of its payment. I received a smaller compensation than I asked for, but enough to support myself and pay for therapy. It wasn't poetic justice, it was a tough settlement, but it gave me some breathing room. With that money, I started a small business. I knew I wouldn't be hired for high-level positions anymore. I knew that for many people, my face was an automatic filter, so I created my own job. I started offering online services, consulting, custom software. Little by little, it worked. Today I am not rich, but I live decently. At least I don't have to look at the faces of bosses who dismiss me before they even listen to me. My rage towards that guy, the lover, led me to do something reckless. I won't go into detail, but today he is in a wheelchair. He was the one who sent me the anonymous messages at the beginning, mocking me. He wanted to destroy me, and in the end, fate destroyed him. I may be disfigured, but he will never walk again. It's not something I'm proud of, but I don't entirely regret it either. As for Talia, she now has a lot of debt. She travels constantly, from what I'm told, and left the children with some uncles. I feel sad for them, but they are children I have cut contact with. I don't hate them, but they are not my responsibility. That is my limit. Changing my living deceased status was not easy. It was legal battle after legal battle. Sometimes I felt like a case file, not a person, but in a way, the compensations have helped me get back on my feet. They allowed me to pay for surgeries, therapies, lawyers, and to start a business. And above all, the support of my parents.